Welcome to the Churchill Club. Tonight's program is called the Local Services Economy, and we're pleased to welcome our speakers, David Carlick of ReachLocal, Logan Green of Lyft, Justin Kahn of Exec, and Sarah Leary of Nextdoor. And of course, our moderator, Doug MacMillan of the Wall Street Journal. Welcome, and thank you all so much for being with us tonight. We'd like to especially acknowledge ReachLocal for their partnership and for making this event possible. We really appreciate this opportunity for all of us to come together and gain new insights into this topic tonight. So thank you so much. And I would also like to thank Eastwick Communications, especially Jane Scuncio, for their invaluable help in putting this event together. A brief introduction to Churchill Club for those in the audience less familiar. We are Silicon Valley's premier independent technology and business-related forum. We have been convening unique Silicon Valley-style programs since 1985, and what drives us every day is to encourage innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. And we do this through the up to 40 programs that we present on an annual basis, where like minds, such as the minds in this room, can learn from one another and come together with new ideas. And we are a member-supported nonprofit organization. We have one more great event for you before we cap off 2013. Next week, one of our most popular programs, just in time for the holidays, it is the 10th annual Gadget Fest with influential tech columnist Walt Mossberg and Kara Swisher of All Things D, gadget geek extraordinaire Greg Harper, and 3 tech celebrity guests. The sisters Ann Wojcicki, founder of 23andMe, Susan Wojcicki, who is SVP of Product at Google, and their mother, who is CEO of ClassBadges. This is on Wednesday, December 11th in Santa Clara. And for our first program of the year, on January 16, we bring you 23-year-old Magnus Carlsen, who I believe 11 days ago became the newly minted world chess champion. And he will be in conversation with Peter Thiel, who's a chess enthusiast himself. Hope you'll take advantage of this chance of a lifetime to meet and be inspired by Magnus. If you're tweeting tonight, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you'll find other Twitter codes in your printed program. And if you would like to access Wi-Fi, the password is Churchill, lowercase. Final announcement. If during the onstage part of the conversation tonight, between now and about 8:30 p.m., if the panel doesn't cover a topic or question that you have, please raise your hand during audience Q&A and ask that question. We want to make sure that you get what you came for in terms of content, so thank you in advance for your cooperation. Our moderator, Doug MacMillan, is currently a technology reporter for the Wall Street Journal, where he focuses primarily on the pre-IPO consumer internet companies that are transforming much of what we do in life, and he brings those changes and their implications to light for us. He previously covered consumer internet companies for Bloomberg News and Bloomberg Business Week, and he appeared as a regular commentator on Bloomberg West, which is the only daily live TV news show dedicated to technology that's actually based here in the West Coast. So we look forward to the conversation that Doug will lead for us tonight. Please give your warmest Churchill Club welcome to Doug MacMillan.
Thanks, Karen. Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm really excited to be here. This is my first time moderating a Churchill Club event and my first panel as a journalist of the Wall Street Journal. So I'm really excited to be here. This is a special event. We have a number of amazing, talented panelists right here who I think represent a kind of good range of thought leaders from the industry of local services. And I want to let them introduce themselves in a second. But first, I kind of just wanted to offer my thoughts on why are we here? What's the local services economy? It's a big term. Let's unpack it a little bit. So I brought up a prop that I'm going to use here. So this is at my doorstep this morning, and this is the Yellow Pages for those who can't see. So this is the local marketplace of the past. If you wanted to be a local business and you wanted to reach people in their neighborhood, whether you're a plumber or a pizza shop or a laundromat or whatever, you go through this or you go through the local printed classified. It's becoming very obvious to everyone around us, is the local marketplace of the future. Using your smartphone today, you can find a restaurant on Yelp. You can book a table at that restaurant on OpenTable. You can get a discount using Groupon. You can get a ride there using Uber or Lyft. You can see what your friends ate at that restaurant using Foursquare or any number of restaurant apps. And if you read the news today, perhaps Amazon will deliver you that meal in your backyard if you ask them nicely. Local ads are going to be a $152 billion market by 2017, and that's up from $132 billion this year, according to BIA Kelsey. And almost all of that growth is in digital. The printed, the traditional, the TV, the radio, local ads are going to be stagnant over the next few years. So this is $20 billion in value that's being created in digital. So what is this? What is this new market that we're entering in the next few years? I think that when you kind of break it down, there's really something for everyone, and there's opportunities for many different players here. For consumers, for people like you and me, I think that there's kind of a world of discovering cool new things in your neighborhood, of interacting with your neighbors in a new way, of finding new local services and businesses in a new way. I think that for local merchants, there's obviously a huge opportunity finally having a compelling reason to get online and to go digital. Maybe you were just buying Google ads before, but now there's new services that will help you find the specific customers and carry through the whole transaction process with them if you're, for example, a home repair shop. And then for communities themselves, finally, I think there's now new compelling reasons to get outside of your house and go interact with the person down the street. I think Logan and I talked about this before. I think that we have the potential to return to an era of communities interacting with each other and creating economies within themselves that is very exciting and it's a very big opportunity for everyone involved. So these are my thoughts on this space, but we have much more smart and experienced people in the space sitting next to me. So why don't we start with David? David, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what ReachLocal is?
Well, you're a consumer-facing pre-IPO guy. ReachLocal is a business-to-business post-IPO company.
Post-IPO, right.
I joined ReachLocal almost 10 years ago when we led the first institutional round, and with about 6 people in the organization, formed to deal with exactly this problem, which is the Yellow Pages wasn't going to work for the small business, and they had to figure out how to get digital and get customers. We had an IPO in 2010 where 24,000 small businesses around the world in 16 countries, and we helped those businesses use digital tools to get customers. And our original mission was to replace the Yellow Pages with phone calls from Google, to put it in the bluntest sense. But we've since found that with social and display and retargeting and other search engines and other things that we have to solve the knotty problem for our small merchants to get their traffic as affordably as possible from many sources. And now we found more than ever that they're in a digital world, so that traffic has to come in and turn into forms filled out, emails sent, text messages sent is our next frontier, and phone calls. And we found that we have to help those people have the tools to have their websites do a better job of converting the visits that they get into engagements, and then the tools for the merchant to follow up with those engagements and turn those engagements into customers. And so we've gone from being an inbound traffic source to our clients to being a partner with them in how they grow their business. And we've even got a test market going here in San Francisco and in Dallas with Club Local, which goes all the way through to booking a transaction.
Right, great. Thank you. Logan?
Sure. So Lyft is a peer-to-peer transportation service. So if you've ever seen a car in the city, or now in the Peninsula, we just launched the Peninsula a few weeks ago. If you've ever seen a car with a big pink mustache on it, that's a Lyft vehicle. And
they're everywhere.
And the concept is taking ordinary folks, non-professional drivers, most folks have a car, and letting them be drivers for a short period of time. And so anybody can apply and go through the Lyft application process where they're background checked, their vehicle is inspected, they're interviewed, and we make sure we get nice, friendly, safe people. So the the checks are actually more stringent than drivers for taxi cabs or limos go through. And we also carry a sort of equivalent or higher level of insurance. And then the experience is you need a ride, you pull out your phone, you hit a button, someone comes within a few minutes and picks you up and takes you wherever you're going. And we encourage people to sit in the front seat. You sit down, the driver gives you a fist bump. It breaks the ice. The
Usually
idea
on the fist, right?
Usually on the fist.
Is it trademarked?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not. You can take it.
It's an opportunity.
So the idea is you're having a more human interaction, a more personal experience. When you get in the back of a cab, it's a service relationship. You bark directions at the driver, they take you where you're going. But with Lyft, it's about creating a more unique personal experience.
Great. Justin, what's Exec?
Cool. My name is Justin Kahn. I'm the co-founder of Exec. Exec is the easiest way to book a cleaning for your house from your phone or from the web. And you just pull out our app, press a button, and pick a time, and we send a team of 2 cleaners who uses all green cleaning supplies to give you, hopefully, an excellent cleaning. We started off actually as something a little bit different. About a year and a half ago, we started off doing everything, and our goal was to kind of be the Uber for any errand that you wanted done. And since then, we've kind of found our niche with cleaning. Before Exec, I started this company called Justin TV, which is like a live video website. And I'm also a part-time partner at the seed fund Y Combinator.
Great. Sarah?
Hello, my name's Sarah Leary, and I'm one of the co-founders of Nextdoor.com. We build private social networks for neighborhoods, and our mission is to use the power of technology to bring back a sense of community around the globe. Today, we just crossed 25,000 neighborhoods across the country. That works out to be about 1 in 6 neighborhoods across the country are using Nextdoor as a way to reconnect with their neighbors. And people use Nextdoor for everything from looking for recommendations from a local service provider, listing items for sale, or talking about suspicious activity in the neighborhood. We've actually partnered with about 125 city and police departments where people are using us as a form of virtual neighborhood watch. And so that's one of the things we're proud of. In Sacramento, they just announced that now that they're using Nextdoor, they've been using us for about 4 or 5 months. They've seen a decline in crime in Sacramento, and they attribute a lot of that most recently to Nextdoor.
Great. As you can see, good group of folks. And I told them all beforehand that I think our goal here is to kind of create a conversation and create a dialogue where we all learn new things. And hopefully, you all will go home with something, having learned something new tonight, as well as us. And I'm hoping to learn new things. So as part of that, we're interested in taking your guys' questions. So if you have, a thought or an idea or a question that occurs to you over the course of the conversation tonight, please write it down or remember it and let us know at the end, and we'll try to get to all the questions. But I wanted to start off with anyone who wants to jump in first with establishing where we are in kind of the local services economy online. I think that most consumers and businesses are familiar with a few kind of established pillars of this world, such as Craigslist, Yelp, OpenTable I mentioned before, Groupon. What's next here? What is left to be paved? What opportunities are left, kind of in a general sense?
I think it's interesting to see how these marketplaces evolve. Craigslist is kind of the most general, right? So I think it makes sense that was one of the first local marketplaces that was built. You have all the major categories, but they're not particularly good at any of them. And now you're seeing, I think, a much better development of a lot of the verticals. So I don't think it's when you sort of step down a level, you look at, the number one household expense is housing. It's about a third of every household's budget. And so Airbnb, is the obvious company in that space for housing and rentals. You have, people own this huge asset, and Airbnb gives them a way to sell that. Lyft, the way we look at the market, transportation is people's number 2 household expense. It's about 20% of a household's budget. And so, people spend a ton of money on their cars, and everybody has this, car laying around that's not in use most of the time. So I think it's natural for that to sort of be, another vertical. But then you keep, going down the list, and there are all sorts of these verticals that I think can be opened up by creating a unique marketplace specifically suited for that.
David, you mentioned before that one of the verticals that you've identified it as a big space kind of in need of a digital upgrade is home repair, and that's something that you've targeted with Club Local. Is that right?
Yeah, well, home repair is our largest vertical segment within ReachLocal around the world, and that's HVAC and fences and garage doors and so forth.
Why do you think that is? What were they missing? What were these businesses missing before that these Yelps weren't offering? Or Angie's List? Maybe?
Well, Angie's List is a great competitor for us, or a great partner with us. It depends on how things turn out. Yelp has been more of a focus around immediate decision things, experiences, restaurants, and so forth, and has had less of a touch on the handyman, home repair, HVAC service. And what has been missing in our area for those larger contractors and the larger businesses is they need to figure out ways to digitally get in touch with people. Increasingly, they need to figure out ways to digitally attract and retain those people. Club Local was a way to give them ways to digitally quote to those people and to conclude the transaction. But what they're dealing with is, and I love the marketplaces. I love being able to go on my phone and get a cleaning service or a car ride. But getting a kitchen remodel is a whole different can of worms, if you will.
You need professionals for that.
Well, you need professionals. It's a complex transaction. It has a long lead time. It has a lot of consideration that goes into it. Has things you have to look into. It has comparison shopping. And so helping a merchant connect with those jobs is equally important, but it's not anywhere close to being a two-sided, real-time, on-your-phone market. Quote me for my new kitchen counter. And yet those merchants have very real needs to reach the people who are going to get their kitchen remodeled and hopefully develop a lifetime relationship and go after their bathroom too.
While we're talking about verticals, Justin, you mentioned that you set out with Exec to do everything and to be the marketplace for anything, which I think is an ambitious goal, but that's what we do in Silicon Valley, is ambitious goals. Why narrow it down to house cleaning, and why did you decide that was your sweet spot?
Well, when we found that when we told people that they could use Exec to book anything they wanted or to do anything, like have someone run any errand, then people thought it was cool, but they didn't really know what anything was. Like they didn't know what to use it for.
Yeah.
So the activation rate was pretty low. One of the things people really liked was cleaning, and we decided, hey, can we do a better verticalized service just focused on this one thing, and then maybe add other verticals to it in the future. And I think if I have anything to say, it's really just that people really want a way to book local services online. I mean, you can see that with Lyft and with Club Local and with Exec. Basically, every service that exists, every local service that exists today, like 5 years from now or 10 years from now, is going to be booked online. Like ZocDoc for doctors, it's already happening. Or like there's Style Seat for beauty salons. There's car wash ones. There's a way to book, like laundry and dry cleaning service online. People don't want to talk to someone on the phone anymore. They don't really care about having a recommendation. They just want to figure out something where they can look online, figure out what the price is, and press a button, and it just shows up. I mean, I think if people could book via text message, they would, or Snapchat. That would book things through Snapchat.
Wait a minute, I lost your booking. You send it on Snapchat.
Only exists for 10 seconds.
Can you send it on another text?
Yeah.
We're getting companies that, again, considered purchase, but are getting better conversion rates from web forms and following up on those with a typed conversation than they are with a classic phone call coming in. They're getting, that's what the customer wants now.
Yep.
Now you can't book, just say, I want to move, my house is 3 bedrooms, send over a truck. There's a more complicated process that goes into that for the time being. But the movers are getting that conversation going faster and closing better in a new generation, whatever age, of people who would prefer to type or text or others.
I want to get back to that, David, just to close out what we're talking about in terms of kind of the verticals that have yet to be kind of penetrated or exploited or utilized by some of these new digital players. Sarah, we were talking beforehand about how there is starting to be some commerce activity bubbling up on Nextdoor, even though you don't specifically target businesses and give them an explicit avenue to pitch your users. You've started to kind of see some organically some interest from local businesses and some specific categories. What are some categories that you're seeing?
So we see recommendations being very, very popular. It's mostly around home and things that are around whether it's HVAC or security systems, or it's just looking for a local service provider, handyman, plumber. One of the examples that we've seen is that there's a community in Loudon, Tennessee, where they all depend on propane. And they felt like they were all getting these terrible deals. And so they bounded together on Nextdoor, and they got together, they elected one person to go negotiate a contract with the local propane provider, and have saved hundreds of dollars for each of the residents and negotiated a contract. And so this type of kind of crowdsourcing, if you will, and coming together, I think is a pretty powerful trend. I think a lot of what you guys have been talking about are about marketplaces, right? And creating these marketplaces. At Nextdoor, we think a little bit more about the platform. And at the core of that, it's really about building a community where trust is at the foundation, where you can feel comfortable about a transaction and looking for a local service provider that you actually trust. And I think a lot of what's going on here is building these marketplaces around trust. And that's a big transition. You know, it used to be the biggest companies that spent the most in the yellow pages or just had the name of a business that started with A got the most business. And I think we're now moving to a place where you can turn to your neighbors, you can ask for a recommendation, you can find out who's really world class and who you should be trusting. And that just spells opportunity and a better experience for consumers.
Or honestly, the one that takes out the two-page ad.
That's right.
When you go through that length.
You know, there's a deal. Consumers tend to look at those guys as being more reliable because they spent the money and they're in business. Surveys early on said that people who paid for a Google ad, honest to God, that's a real business. It's okay, I trust that. It's okay to click on that. I love the service, by the way. I'm a subscriber. And other than the fact that I was reported for suspicious activity in my neighborhood.
Sounds like it's working.
And the conversation that keeps going on in our neighborhood of the home and home repair stuff is fascinating. I can see a time when we'll be talking to you about getting in on that conversation.
Well, let's talk about this. So, Sarah, you have yet to make any revenue. Nextdoor is a big, growing business. It's a hot, service with consumers. You still are in kind of, the mode of, not committing to any one business model. But kind of more broadly, I want you to talk about that a little bit. But more broadly, how do you think about applying a business model to these types of local services? We've seen, varying approaches. From Yelp relies on kind of targeted ads towards what I'm searching for or what I've been looking at, and Uber is a very popular service, and many other, smartphone-based businesses are relying on transaction-based businesses as well as ReachLocal. So how do you kind of weigh the benefits of advertising versus transaction, and what are you thinking about in terms of Nextdoor?
Sure. So we are primarily focused right now on building out a great user experience and rolling it out across the country, especially getting critical mass in major cities. So, for example, 97% of the neighborhoods in San Francisco use Nextdoor, over 90% in San Jose, and you see this across the country. And that's where you can get some critical mass and build some of these market opportunities that you allude to. The most important thing for us is to build a revenue model that is additive to the experience. And so one of the things that we watch very closely is how are people using Nextdoor and what are they turning to their neighbors for? They're looking for recommendations for security systems, trying to get together to negotiate propane, as I mentioned, looking for a great HVAC system. What can we do to provide a better experience? And we think that there's a lot of opportunity there. We also look at the yellow pages and local TV advertising and local newspaper advertising. That has been a $116 billion business that's just on a slow, steady decline. And we think that there's a huge opportunity to help these local businesses connect with their local customers. And that's really important. You look at what Groupon did. Groupon identified that there was a huge pent-up need for local businesses to try and find a way to use online as a way to drive customers. The problem was that people would drive clear across town to go to a restaurant once. They didn't become long-term customers. And what we want to be able to do is to help local businesses connect with local customers that become lifetime customers.
And how do you do that?
And so we think of things, very simple things like, is there a section of our website that could be like the yellow pages, where people could go in and learn about local businesses? But in order to get in there, you'd actually have to be endorsed by several of the neighbors in that community. And so it's a little bit thinking about yellow pages, a little bit Yelp, a little bit of this recommendation model. I also think that there's an opportunity for us to be partnering with some of these security companies, HVAC companies, to try and provide better price points for people to buy some of these high-ticket items that they have to purchase for their house. So these are all opportunities. We're going to watch very carefully to see how people naturally use Nextdoor and where the business opportunities lie from there. And we'll test our way to find the perfect business model for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you need snow tires and it's snowing and you open up the newspaper and there's a snow tire ad, this is a great ad. I need snow tires. And so when advertising, this is why Google is the largest revenue media company in the world, is most of Google is I need something, and so there's the advertiser that pays for that need, and the advertising is relevant and useful, and it's just basic content. It's a great thing.
Mm-hmm. I think in general, the closer to the transaction you can get, the better. I think when you're comparing sort of advertising versus transactional business model, interesting examples looking at HomeAway versus Airbnb. And HomeAway, you get more sort of professional vacation, homeowners. Airbnb, you get more individuals renting out their own apartment or room in their apartment. And when you're thinking about a kind of the more peer-to-peer model, you want to do everything you can to get that supply in the door and in the market. And so you don't want to put up this upfront barrier that you have to go and pay money to HomeAway to advertise your property. You want to be able to list it for free. Get that person in the door, take away all of the risk from them, and then completely align yourself with the supply side of your marketplace. So I think HomeAway is now starting to copy Airbnb in modeling this transaction model. For both of us, I think the transaction model is a really straightforward one, and just make sure you're clearly aligned with your supply.
And I think Yelp has run into this a little bit. When you rely on the advertising model, then you do risk a little bit the issue of trust. And am I, seeing this ad on top of this list because they paid for it, or because it's what all my friends recommended to me?
Yeah.
Justin, can you explain the business model behind Exec? Is it a transaction-based model?
Yeah, basically people book cleanings and we charge them. And
you take a cut?
Yeah, we invented that. And then there's a rev share with our cleaners, and it's pretty simple. If you're not satisfied, we give you your money back. So be satisfied.
Great. Well, let's talk about more this issue of trust, because that seems to be a theme that's emerging here. So the most common thing that I think a lot of people who are familiar with Airbnb or even Yelp or many of these sites that have reviews, people are familiar with the peer kind of trust model of either my friends on Facebook or even somebody who's a regular user of this site gave it a good review. So it's their stamp of approval. What are some other, is that a good model, or what are some other ways to promote trust in your services?
I think one of the big ways that we do and Lyft does is have a brand that people just is out there and people recognize, right? Having a recognizable brand is a big thing. I think there's this kind of eBay or Airbnb model where the onus is on the consumer to evaluate whether they think it's like a legitimate and good enough place. And people are starting to move towards, I trust the brand, I'm going to try them, and then if I have a good experience, then that starts the relationship, and then hopefully I do it over and over and over again, and I have many good relationships.
The brand of the overriding service of the
exactly.
Airbnb.
It's the same with Club Local too. It's like you book, people don't want to have as much choice. I think there's a lot of friction in having a lot of choice. And so for bigger things, like maybe if you're going on vacation and you want an Airbnb, you want to pick the perfect place, but for something that's I need to get from point A to point B, you trust the Lyft brand, and that's.
We did a heavy-duty rating thing on all the technicians that went out for Club Local and bubbled up the people that got good ratings, and so that really contributed to the experience, generating that kind of confidence, because we And what we found is that with the math of it all is that I don't know how it is in the Lyft business or the cleaning business, but the top performers are so much more profitable for their merchants than the lower performers that it just made more sense to send out the top performers. Everybody was happier.
Right. And I think when you, particularly as you see these businesses go mobile, right, to where you're in one of these verticals, you want a service, you pull out your phone, you click a button. There's no time to sort of sift through listings or pick out just the right one. You just want the brand, the company, the overarching marketplace to figure it out for you and send the best person. So I think that does put like a much greater responsibility on the company to sort this out and figure out what's important. So I know when we launched, we had to figure out how much do we want ratings to take care of, to be the quality filter versus us doing sort of vetting and interviewing ahead of time. And we decided, look, people aren't going to know what a 5-star ride is in the beginning. They don't know what to expect from a peer-to-peer transportation company. This doesn't exist. So let's interview these drivers, like vet them really thoroughly, make sure we get top quality folks out there on the road, and then we'll kind of define what a 5-star rating is. And after that, we can use the system to kind of automatically vet people. But I think there's a lot of weight in kind of defining early on what your brand means and what sort of level of quality of service somebody could expect.
We think about it a little bit differently because of the nature of what we're building, and trust for us really starts with identity, real identity.
Yeah.
And the whole idea is that you cannot join a Nextdoor website unless you can verify that you live within the boundaries of that neighborhood. And when you join at your address, and you join using your real name. And that brings a whole level of social norms and behavior that is very, very powerful and leads you to feeling more comfortable about sharing information, potentially sharing your car or a ladder or getting a recommendation, who knows what, but a little bit different and obviously very different services in that respect.
You came up with a pretty unique way to verify people's home addresses.
So verification, we do one of 5 different ways. The first and probably the simplest to understand is that we will literally send a postcard to your house to verify your address. We care so much about privacy that we will spend the money to send that postcard to your house. You'll get a code and be able to put that in when it arrives at your house. For those that have a publicly listed phone number, we'll look up the address and do a reverse lookup and call that number, give an access code. We can do that with a mobile phone, with a credit card. And these are all ways that we are verifying that you actually live within the neighborhood. And it's been a key differentiator. I'm sure many of you have probably heard about people trying to do something with local community, and many of those companies have failed because they've tried to take shortcuts around creating real community. And ultimately, what we want is we want to create an online environment such that people will talk to each other just like they would if they came across each other on the street or at the mailboxes, kind of you name it. And so we've put a lot of investment into creating this platform where people feel comfortable about who they're talking to.
Logan, you have thoughts on this. Like, how are communities going to start changing their behaviors? And you think that this is going to be kind of a back to the future? This is going to be a behavior that we once had that we've gone away from?
Yeah, I think there's this, what we're saying is there's this huge sort of pent-up demand for interacting with and buying services from people in your own community. I think as sort of a culture, as a civilization, I think people are burnt out on the sort of impersonal, interactions, transactions with these kind of faceless companies. And we're used to, having to rely on these kind of generic companies to buy all of our goods and services. And if you go back 100 years and you look at how people lived, they relied on the people in their town, they relied on their community for everything. Everything they bought, from the food to their housing to local services. And I feel like we figured out how to build bigger cities faster than we figured out how to process that level of information. So all of a sudden we were living in cities with 1 million people around us. We didn't know our neighbor. We didn't know, how good the person was who was listed in the yellow pages. And it got to a scale beyond what we could sort of process as an individual. And so all sorts of things happened in that process. One, a lot of really bad companies sort of survived because people didn't realize how bad they were. The government had to step in and start, doing things like health code inspections, and the government tried to sort of regulate sort of baseline policies in some of these industries. But now what we're seeing with, with the sort of information layer that we're creating is, we're allowing people to pick the best companies, or going even further than that, pick, individuals to provide those services within their community, and do that in a way where they can safely connect with somebody else who they can trust. And I think people are flocking to that.
I totally agree. And I think we like to think about all these social networks that exist out there, but if you look back, the neighborhood was really the original social network, right? It was a place where you shared resources, you looked out for each other, you protected each other. And I think the neat thing that's happening is now technology can help us get back to that. And it turns out that human beings want to have that connection. Yes, I love being able to use OpenTable to get my table reservation, but I still crave an interaction with a person when I get to the restaurant. And I may not want to be best friends with them, but I do value that connection. And we certainly see it on Nextdoor, where people, they really appreciate what we're doing, and they talk about, wow, I didn't realize how much I had in common with my neighbors. And it's in a very emotional response. It's not just the utilitarian benefit of sharing resources. It's about personal connection. And I'm sure it's part of what you guys are seeing with Lyft, and even these small, subtle things that you do about connecting with the person with whom you're sharing a ride. They're important, right? Sociologists would talk about building social capital and social reciprocity and building trust very quickly, and human beings need and want that.
But the local person that I most frequently connect with happens to be the UPS guy. But all that being considered, it's still the truth.
So I'm going to be the downer here, and I mean, yes, this is a great future, but government's made these regulations and came in and played this role for a reason. And there are bad actors and there are dangers when you involve kind of opening up the world, and especially local communities where honestly, you don't know all the people who are in that community necessarily, and what dangers they might present, or what danger it might be to get in a stranger's car. So how do you guys feel about kind of regulation? Is there a role for governments to step in and play here? And is the onus on kind of you as entrepreneurs to go out and extend that, start working with these governments on kind of how you're going to regulate these kind of brave new worlds?
Well, in our case, we're literally being approached by police departments to partner with us to use Nextdoor as a way to bring neighborhoods together and make sure that neighbors are looking out for each other. So they're actually coming to us and saying, can you help us, right? You're seeing budget cuts, fewer officers on the street, and the best way to address that is community policing and partnering. And it turns out that neighbors that know each other look out for each other and report crime before it reports suspicious activity before it even becomes crime. And so we love working with local governments and particularly police departments because we think we can help, and they think so.
You've run into this, though, haven't you?
Yeah, so regulation has been a huge deal for Lyft. We got a cease and desist a couple months after we launched, and have had we have a wall with all the cease and
Driven
desists.
by government or by the taxis?
By government, but the taxis are related. So I think there's two reasons for government, regulation. There's to protect public safety, and fully supportive of that aspect of regulation. But then there's to thwart competition, and that's where I think you get in trouble. But just kind of stepping back a little bit from that, before you were ordering, a ride from your phone, you were throwing your hand up in the air and hailing a car on the street, right? And in that world where you have no information about the driver, right? There's no sort of digital system that's tracking this, that's processing that. In that world, it is actually really important that the car is bright yellow, right? And that there's a medallion affixed to it. Because you don't want to just get picked up by any stranger. You need to know that that person was background checked, is carrying proper insurance. If they, get a bad reputation, that they get kicked out of the system. You need to know those things are true. And in the sort of old world, the only way to do that was by painting cars bright yellow. And now
You do it with a pink mustache.
yeah. And now you do it with pink mustache. You really don't need the pink mustache. You order through the phone. The person shows up. Everything is tracked through the system. And so anyway, I think that's part of the evolution you're seeing. But the taxi cab regulation has taken a lot of sort of twists over the years. It was originally, taxis were originally regulated for safety, but then cities sort of took it a step further and they started capping the number of medallions. And this was, of course, influenced by the first set of taxi cab drivers who said, hey, business would be a little bit better for us if nobody else could become a cab driver. And, slowly but surely they started talking city after city into this idea of limiting the number of medallions on the road. And,
It turned into a big profit center for the cities as well.
the cities have actually crippled their own profits by capping the size of the market. Cities do profit some from medallions, but if they had allowed the market to be as large as it could. So New York, in the Depression era, there were 30,000 cabs on the road. They created the medallion system and dropped it down to 11,000. Today, there are 13,000 cabs on the road. So they've slowly increased over the last 80 years. They've slowly increased the number of medallions. But the point is, the markets, every cab market in every city across the U.S. could probably be 3 to 5 times bigger if it weren't for this sort of anti-competitive regulation.
Well, to David's point, is taxation one of the issues here? And this is, we don't have Airbnb on the panel, but this is kind of one of the issues it looks like Airbnb is fighting in New York and probably other markets it expands into. As we create these new economies within our local communities, isn't it incumbent upon governments to not only step in and regulate for security reasons and safety reasons, but to actually kind of reap some reward of that and help in the creation of those economies?
Yeah, definitely. So the issue Airbnb is facing is, I think, pretty different from the issue we're facing. The issue with medallions isn't the government, getting their cut from it or making their cut from it. If the government shifted their taxation to a straight sort of transactional model, so to speak, then they clearly align themselves with growing that market as large as possible, right? But they've artificially crippled these markets, and so therefore they're only able to tax the much smaller version of that market that exists. In the sort of hotel world and Airbnb's world is very different. Airbnb's created a new industry similar to hotels, and now governments are realizing that there's a big tax opportunity on the table, and they're starting to go after that.
It's going to come with electric cars because road tax that pays for the roads is collected as a gas tax. And so if you don't pay that with an electric car, you're kind of getting a free ride on the highway. So that's being figured out too.
Cool. I want to kind of take a little bit of a different turn and talk about most of the companies we're seeing, a lot of the companies that are kind of starting to make some big waves in the local services economy are startups. And I know that we have a lot of entrepreneurs in the room, people who have worked at startups before. But I'm curious, why are we not seeing more of the big internet players succeed in this world? I was joking about Amazon before, but it looks like Amazon really wants to kind of take its e-commerce play into the local world. Do you see kind of in this future that we're talking about, the Googles and Amazons and Facebooks and Twitters kind of making a play at becoming powerful commerce or advertising players in the local services economy? Or is this, is there something by its nature that's suited towards kind of more nimble startups?
I think they are right now. I mean, Google Shopping Express is pretty awesome.
Can you explain what that is?
Google Shopping Express is like an app to buy things for same day or next day delivery through Google. They, I think, work with local stores.
Is that just in a few markets now?
It's just in the Bay Area, I think.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure. And eBay has a similar thing called eBay Now, to buy in, I think it's New York, Chicago, and San
Where they
Francisco.
deliver you stuff, basically
they
anything you want.
Deliver you stuff from local stores, basically. And I think those are probably much more successful than a lot of the startups that are doing, same-day delivery, just because they've been able to do it on a much higher scale while taking an extremely low margin. Amazon is probably like the most successful local commerce company in the sense that they're displacing all sorts of local commerce with just like Amazon Prime deliveries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, we tend to get a TechCrunch-like focus on a startup as somebody who has venture capital and starts a new company. We've got these clients around the world who are the entrepreneurial startups. A plumber who starts a business and hires more plumbers is a startup, is an entrepreneur. Same thing with somebody who does a garage door company, or same thing who starts a moving and storage company. So we serve as a world full of local entrepreneurs that are growing their business and serving the local economy. It's thrilling.
Sure.
I think, Justin, you're right. The Googles and the eBays are certainly trying to play in the local shopping experience. Those tend to be a little bit more transaction-based, which plays to the strengths of these larger companies. I think that it has been much more difficult for the large consumer internet companies to successfully build real community-based properties. I think it's very hard to do that at scale because you can't do the nuance work to get it right. And there's a lot of nuances to get Lyft right in the very beginning, or Exec right, or Nextdoor right. And if you have thousands, if not millions of people coming in on day one, it's very, very difficult. And so I tend to be of the camp that believes that community-based products and services are better suited towards smaller startups where you can experiment and you can get it right and then you can scale. And I think you've seen that. YouTube's hugely successful, but Google Video, not as much. And I think that there's just been a harder time getting those off the ground with these really large properties.
Show me what do you mean by like a nuanced part of this? What have you done in some of the local markets that you don't think that these internet companies have gone to the trouble of doing?
So we were in private beta for a year. We had 176 neighborhoods in the very beginning using Nextdoor, and it took us almost 12 months to get that right. We originally started off with an idea that this was going to be a place where people would talk about civic issues and they'll take sides on a topic. There was a new proposition in San Francisco, are you for it or against it? Well, we went out and actually tested that and learned that's not what people wanted. They wanted to talk about everyday things in their neighborhood, like who's a great handyman and what's up with that suspicious van parked at the end of the street. If we had
I'll move
launched, if we had launched in one direction, it would have been very hard to change that. We were able to launch in one neighborhood and get it right. We learned about how important address verification was, and so we built up to get that right. We had to figure out how to draw the neighborhood boundaries, and we trial and error to get that right. Figuring out how to replicate the real-world interactions that exist in the neighborhood level is very nuanced. And that was something that we learned because we were able to talk with our first neighborhoods on a daily basis and learn about what worked and what didn't work. And if we had tried to launch that across the country on day one, we probably would have failed miserably at it.
And does Amazon not see this, or do they not choose to invest in this? I mean, if they have targeted local as kind of their big opportunity here.
I think they have a chance to be able to do it. I think if it's a large-scale, transaction-based business, that's well-suited to the things that they do very well. But creating something that's bottoms-up, community-based, I think that that's more difficult for these larger companies to really do because they're doing it under the global brand that they already have. They have millions of users already up and using their product, and so you can't do as much trial and error. I'm sure that someone will figure out a way to do it. It's just much more difficult to do it. The fire hose of traffic can almost be a detriment in the beginning.
Logan, are you seeing big differences in the kind of the various? How many markets are you in now?
We're in 18 markets now,
Okay.
just in the U.S.
Do you see, like Sarah has, kind of nuances with every different place?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of nuances. I think it's way too kind of odd of a concept in a way for any big company to be the one to take it on. and it comes
You're
along
talking about
with
driving specifically.
about driving specifically, or I mean, I think and like cleaning, Lyft, Airbnb. These are like difficult businesses with like lots of nuance to them, and I just can't imagine there's no player out there who is pushing the envelope in those areas. So I think it takes a startup, with a crazy idea that thinks people want something that doesn't exist, and then sort of pushes the envelope on that. But yeah, there's a ton of nuances that we have to deal with from from the onboarding process. How do you make it frictionless, yet secure, quickly onboard people? How do you sort of train people enough so that you have like a certain level of quality in the Lyft experience, but allow for the sort of level of unique individuality, and then how do you make sure you balance supply and demand? And that's a huge challenge that we deal with and is very different in every market. So how do you make sure you have enough drivers available at rush hour in San Francisco when everyone's trying to get a ride to work, or on Saturday night in LA when everybody's going out, and tuning the system to work perfectly in each market is a big challenge.
What are your peak loads?
The peak loads, it's a really interesting pattern to see. The commute function is pretty significant. So you see every morning a peak as people head into work, and then a bigger peak as people head home and go out in the evenings. Throughout the week, you notice that people get into work a little bit later every day of the week. And it's just a few minutes each day. It's really subtle. And then Friday, it's like an hour. And then there's huge peaks on Friday and Saturday night with folks going out. And there's a church peak on Sunday.
Really?
Yeah.
Because of all the libations that they serve at the services, people need to have a safe ride home.
Exactly.
While we're on the topic, does anyone have thoughts on Amazon's drone program?
I'm in favor. We live in a slightly remote area, so they could land in our driveway quite easily, and it would save a lot of UPS fumes coming up there for our daily delivery of non-local stuff.
You'd miss out on that daily interaction with the UPS driver.
That's true. He knows me by name.
I guess just to kind of close out that point, if the Amazons and Facebooks and Googles can't get it right on their own, the next option they have is to buy one of you guys, right? Are you seeing a lot of M&A interest? Are those kinds of talks and those approaches increasing over time, and are the kind of the range of acquirers in this space growing? Off the record.
Oh, sure.
I don't think so. I honestly think that these companies are so different from a company like Amazon or Google that I think they'll remain independent. There isn't the verticals are all so unique and specific that it
doesn't make sense for
it's hard to imagine
Google to buy a Lyft.
Yeah, one company.
Sooner or later,
aggregating it all.
somebody always shows up to consolidate. It's history will show that will happen.
I've heard this line 1,000 times. It's right until it's wrong. It's right until somebody actually does come out and buy someone.
Yeah, no, I agree. We see a lot of people looking at what we're doing and say, wow, that looks like a hard business. And it is, right? To spin up 25,000 private social networks across the country is not trivial. And I think a lot of people have other businesses that they're focused on. And so we're fine with that.
We started the conversation by talking about categories that you see as ripe opportunities that you're seeing a lot of demand for. Are there categories that are just not going to come online that you have looked at? Maybe, Justin, did you see kind of opportunities that you expected when you started Exec as kind of a service for anything that just didn't happen, or the mechanics or the economics of it just didn't work out?
Well, I think like Dave was saying, things that are bigger ticket items are harder to like just book from your phone, right? Or so like if you want someone to remodel your kitchen, you're probably not going to like use the Uber of remodeling and just trust whoever shows up to do something.
Don't bring samples, just do it.
Yeah. So
I like gray.
I think those are a little bit harder, but I think, a lot of things where people thought that you needed like a recommendation or relationship are like coming online. Like you can look at ZocDoc as being something where, I think if I told my mom, oh, you can find a doctor online, she'd be like, why would I trust that? But, everyone I know who's, my age and younger in New York is like, I just want someone who seems to have good reviews, whatever.
Yeah.
Same is true of like, you can get like a massage, an on-demand massage app in New York. And you would think that that would be a very personal relationship you'd want to have with someone that you vetted, but.
Can't you just set your phone on vibrate?
That's the lower tier free version.
But it is an app.
So, yeah, I think that like it turns out that people will buy a lot of different local services online. So, you should find something that's not yet online, and maybe you can be the one to turn it into an app.
Whereas, as Logan, you were talking about going down the list of kind of the main household expenditures. That might be an opportunity for the entrepreneurs in the room to look at what's what are the categories that are still missing kind of the icon on the home screen of your iPhone. Great. Well, I think that this answers my questions at least. So I'm interested in turning it over to you guys and hear what smart questions I'm missing or what you're curious about. We have some folks walking around with microphones, and they're going to come.
All questions are smart questions.
Come find you. There's no dumb questions. I was told that in kindergarten.
Hello, my name is Olga, and I have my own show, radio and TV show, and which is called, obviously, Olga Show. Anyway, so I would like to ask you, how do you let the community know about your services and your companies? That's number one. And second, how would you like to outreach that with your company and services? How would you let more people reach out? How do you let them know about you and how you do it already?
So I'll take a stab at this one. So the biggest thing for us is success stories of neighborhoods that are using Nextdoor. And word of mouth is one of the most important ones. The second thing that we do a lot of is that we tell these stories through the local press. So we have a team on our communications team, actually Kelsey heads up this team, and there are 4 people who are out there telling stories across the country about how local neighborhoods are using Nextdoor to build stronger, safer communities. And it turns out that local newscasts and local papers are starving for information, but they need to have a local angle. And so we just have a lot of local news that's happening on our websites, and we try and help those neighborhoods tell their stories. And that has been a very, very successful way for us to get the word out about Nextdoor in a very cost-effective way, and most importantly, a very authentic way. It's not us telling the story about Nextdoor, it's local neighbors sharing the story with their fellow neighbors.
I think the best thing for us has been word of mouth. Doing a good job leads to people telling other people about the good job you did. And we've tried a lot of different things, from Facebook ads to door hangers to bus ads, to display and iPhone app ads. It's like pretty much everything. But nothing beats word of mouth.
Well, in terms of paid customer acquisition, are there tactics that work better for local businesses, local services, as opposed to kind of the national brands?
Well, you can't avoid, you cannot neglect the people who've typed in, "I need a plumber," into a search engine. That's the first and foremost place. If you miss them, you're going to miss out a whole lot of people who are in the decision-making mode and want to make a decision. Now, if you're fortunate enough that you've got a word-of-mouth deal, or you're highly rated by some folks, or the people on Nextdoor have raved about you, that's great. But in the meantime, if you don't find the people who are searching, and there's thousands and thousands every day, then you lose it.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on search.
Search.
Yeah.
Cool.
For us, it's been the pink mustache. And just like outdoor advertising, I think is very effective. So we were inspired by Zipcar and the level of awareness that Zipcar had by having branded vehicles and branded parking spots. And so when we were launching Lyft, we were thinking about how could you identify the car and pick the pink mustache.
Is that your idea?
It was my co-founder John's idea. And
You don't have a different color for each community?
No, they're all bright pink.
That's nice.
But what we see in the beginning is, people will see, one or two and write it off as, someone who just got back from Burning Man, or someone doing something for.
In their
It
Nissan
splits
Sentra.
between prostate cancer and breast cancer awareness. It's kind of a combination. But then they'll see 4 or 5 in a day, and all of a sudden think, all right, like something's going on here. And we see this in every city. It's like the mustache tipping point, where it just becomes impossible to sort of go out without seeing a few of these. And then that's where search kicks in for us. And a lot of people actually find us Googling like pink mustache. Yeah.
Cool. We have another question? Yeah.
So as an investor, I'm pretty excited about the intersection between local and digital. But as a student of society, I keep thinking back to a book that came out about 20 years ago called The Bell Curve. And I'm wondering whether, from the panelist view, does what you do in terms of the intersection between local and digital benefit and encourage homogeneity within communities and isolationism between communities? Is there a way to use local to break down the separation and increase heterogeneity between communities? Or is this completely orthogonal to these underlying trends?
I'm just running a cleaning service.
Well, so I'll just say that in the beginning, I think a lot of people thought that Nextdoor would only be used in the suburbs, that it would just be this very idyllic type of community that would want to use it. And we even had people say, oh, this will only get used in the Bay Area. And what we learned very quickly was that rural parts of upstate New York wanted to use it. Folks on the south side of Chicago wanted to use it. That folks in parts of Brooklyn that you would think were tough neighborhoods wanted to use it. They had different things that they wanted to talk about in these communities, but they had a shared interest in creating stronger, safer communities. What we have learned, though, is that for some, they just don't have a laptop or a desktop. Instead, the mobile phone is the primary way that you can connect them to this world. And whether it's Android or iPhone, primarily Android in some parts of the inner city, you need to have a presence there such that people can join and be a part of the conversation. And so I'm a big believer that technology can actually level the playing field and bring everyone to the conversation and find common ground. We've at least seen that in many cities across the country, and it hasn't been this great digital divide that people are being left behind and not part of that conversation.
How do you define where the border of a neighborhood is? Is that up for debate sometimes, or are there arguments about that sometimes?
So the first person who comes on board to Nextdoor, the founding member, draws their neighborhood boundary, and then they're given 21 days to recruit 9 other neighbors to come in and
That
verify
explains
their
why
address.
the map of our neighborhood had a little thing around our house and then kept going.
We don't allow that to happen. We're pretty sophisticated in that
Gerrymandered.
technology.
Can't believe it.
We try to avoid the gerrymandering issue. But we try and create a neighborhood boundary that at least 10 residents of that community have said, yes, this is the right neighborhood, this is the right name of the neighborhood. So it's a kind of voting mechanism and trying to crowdsource these neighborhood boundaries, because it turns out they don't exist in any centralized format today.
Do they overlap? Do the
No,
neighborhoods
they never overlap.
Next question, please.
This question is specifically for Sarah from Nextdoor. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
My name is Ian Dongwen. I have 2 questions. One is, when you started, you say you started from one neighborhood and then spread it out to the other neighborhoods. So how did you gain trust of other neighborhoods? Because, if I'm the second or third, I might be scared. That's the first question. Second question, you say you have done private beta for about 1 year. And I'm a Nextdoor user, recently joined like 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
And I noticed that your funding status, that in about 2 years of funding the company, you did not have any VC investors. How did you survive the first year without any external funding?
Okay, so
Thank you.
two questions. One, how did we survive without venture funding in the first year? So the short answer to that is we actually had venture funding. Nextdoor was a pivot out of a failed company And so the funding that we used in that first year was out of the first company that failed. And we took all the mistakes that we made in that first company and we tried to not repeat them. And one of the big things that we learned was that we needed to work much more closely with our target market before we could launch to make sure we got the product right. I think your first question was, how did you get those first couple of neighborhoods up and running in the beginning? This was good old-fashioned building business by personal relationships. So the first neighborhood that we launched was in Menlo Park, Lorelei. I went down and pitched the idea of Nextdoor to that neighborhood at neighborhood meetings 3 times. And they kind of looked me in the eye and said, are you really going to build this? Are you going to be behind this? Should we trust you? And God bless them. They said, we're willing to be your guinea pig. It worked well. And then we had 3 or 4 more neighborhoods that wanted to give it a try. And mostly it was because of word of mouth. Someone in that first neighborhood told the neighborhood that was right next to it. Then I told a couple people, they liked that. And there was just this clear pent-up demand. And we had an opportunity to build something that, that would address that demand. And I think one of the key things that we did in the beginning was basically convince these neighborhoods that we were going to build something that would work for them because that would help us and it would help them. And there are people out there who want to be early adopters. And so if you're building a company, go find them and spend a lot of time with them and learn what works and then replicate that for other neighborhoods.
Great. Next question, please.
Right here. First of all, thanks for the great topic and thanks for your time. Cesar Orozco, quick question about technology. Sarah, curious to know, in your case, how do you spin up 25,000 distinct social groups? I mean, curious to know about the technology behind it. And in general, question for the panel, you know, what role does technology play? I mean, of course, as you launch a new business, it's beyond just having a great idea and a business model. But sometimes the use of technology makes a difference in making it or not making it. So Sarah, you know, in general, you know, how do you spin up 25,000 distinct neighborhoods and the technology question in your business model? Thanks, guys.
Most of that first year when we were in private beta, we were testing the concept and we were also building the platform that allowed anyone to come in and draw that neighborhood boundary. We got a little bit lucky. One of my co-founders was the head of engineering for Google Maps for about 3 years. So he knew how to handle that data and how to think about the geospatial layer. But we've had to master understanding the dynamics of creating a social network. We've had to think about the geospatial layer, the address verification. And then the other piece of it is that I worked at a previous company called ePinions, which was all about user-generated content and understanding how do you build trust in a community when people don't necessarily know each other. And so some of that was helpful. So we got a little bit lucky on that front. But I personally think a big point of differentiation for our company has been that we have deep experience in technology and using technology as a competitive advantage. Most of the competitors in our space were small regional players who couldn't figure out how to roll this out nationally. And so I think that has been a key differentiator.
ReachLocal, when it was a tiny company, started out as a technology platform to be able to go to search engines and buy locally and intelligently buy for a geo-targeted area with the right keywords for the right person, and then manage those things through phone calls that we could track and record, and then look at which kinds of activities led to more phone calls and go back and readjust our buy to get more phone calls. And so it was a technology platform from the get-go, and expanding into a sales force and a global operation came from spreading that platform. Without the platform, there would be no company.
For Lyft, I think the most interesting piece of technology is the dispatch system. So being able to predict where in the city the next request is going to come from and direct a driver there. If you think about sort of, you know, inefficient cab network, they're, you know, combing the streets looking for folks, and we're able to make that a lot more efficient by directing them to the right place to go ahead of time.
Did somebody have a logistics background in the group?
There's actually no logistics backgrounds. Our CTO was also on the Google Maps team, so there's some Google Maps.
At least he's logical.
Yeah.
So recruiting is one of the kind of themes of this answer.
Hire someone smart.
Yeah.
Do we have another question out there? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rico. First of all, thank you for Churchill Club as well as ReachLocal to invite us Santa Clara students over here. Has a great experience, great time.
Welcome.
But a quick question for Justin and also Lyft. So you see, you both came up with a pretty revolutionary idea, an idea that we see, there's a need for. But it's all about supply and demand. How do you have the supply and demand come in about the right time and have it to kick in around the right time? Because if you have the supply and you don't have the demand, there's no drivers for you. At the same time, if there's too many drivers and there's no demand for it, the driver won't stay. So how do you kick in the right time at the right intersection to have both rush up and create a successful company that you guys have?
Well, balancing the supply and demand is one of the hardest parts of Exec. I think it's probably actually the hardest thing.
But for Exec, you guys could actually go to the cleaners and say, hey, this is the business model, and can you guys sign up? And now I go find the customer. Right? Whereas
so we recruit. I mean, we've filtered over 20,000 job applications for cleaning positions in the past year, and there's a lot of technology around automation around the hiring process, and we also, we do supply or demand predictions across day of the week and into the future on every city and figure out what we need to hire and try to match it so that we don't have a lot of idle time because that causes people to churn out. So I don't know. There's a lot of effort that goes into that operationally.
Yeah, I agree. That's the hardest part of the business. In any new city we go to, for the first few months, we pay people, that are sort of beta drivers while we're in beta mode. We pay them by the hour because it's the kind of chicken or egg problem. And so our solution is to buy the chicken and just put it in the city, and that jump starts it. But beyond that, there is that issue of, you don't want too many folks to show up at the wrong time, then nobody's doing well. So what we do is we sort of put caps in place. So it's a reservation system. Drivers can reserve a certain time, and then they're guaranteed they can go out and drive at that period. And if the sort of cap gets hit, then new folks can't sign in. And that means that everybody who's out there at a given hour, is making good money.
When you first started, let's say you have 20 drivers in San Francisco. Having only the 20 drivers is not efficient or sufficient enough for the user to have a good experience, right? So how do you actually have, how do you really start off? That's the big question.
You limited the signups initially, right?
Well, so actually, 20 drivers is fine, when you only have, 100 users, right? So you actually don't need a massive number of folks available at any moment, right? And as you grow, you go from 20 drivers being available, at all times to, 30 being available and, a bunch in use, and it kind of takes off. So that it is expensive to launch a new market, but you only need to be able to afford an extra 10 or 20 folks available at any point.
And I guess the secret sauce is a little pink moustache for that big one.
This is actually a really interesting question. I think one of the trends that I'm seeing, just talking to some of the most popular services that are creating these marketplaces, is their name brand is taking off, and they're being used by millions and millions of people as they expand into markets around the world. Mm-hmm. And usually there's not enough supply is usually the problem. So we saw with Airbnb is starting to invest more in how they bring more people on board in terms of kind of hosts, and also just investing in those people in terms of helping them, kind of giving them the tools and the training they need to kind of make it more like a hotel experience, for example. And also I think they're giving out iPhones to some of their hosts. Uber, we saw, made an announcement last week that they're doing some financing programs for people who want to buy new cars, just to kind of get more people physically on the road with cheaper cars and making car ownership more affordable. So I think that you're starting to see this as a trend as these kind of name brand startups take off that are kind of leveraging these marketplaces. That supply is one of the kind of big challenges, and how do they go out and light up a lot of supply around the world?
Like eBay came up with health insurance for all of their marketplace participants.
Is that right?
Years back. Yeah.
Is there another question?
Hey, I'm Manfred. I'm over here, by the way. So, kind of following up on the question, this is for the whole panel. So far, we've mostly been talking about North America and kind of scaling up, from neighborhoods and like different parts in the United States. And the question is, what are the biggest challenges that you see, and what are your strategies? How are you going to go beyond a relatively homogeneous market, you know, and especially when you go to emerging markets?
Great question.
Well, we've actually done that. We're in 16 countries. And you're absolutely right. There's a demand worldwide. There's small businesses worldwide. And what you call an emerging market, say Brazil, within that emerging market are robust economies of people making a lot of money. There's car dealers and plumbers and businesses that can be served, and we're enjoying that. And we've expanded to Tokyo. We've done a great business in Australia. We're in Europe, the UK, Germany, others. We're in Russia. Amsterdam, all those countries have their nuances, but they're amenable to this. And what we're finding, interestingly, is in our 6th year of global operation is that we're learning as much from the international operations how to do things better than they are from the U.S. operation. We're importing a lot of knowledge, really smart people who come up with new ways to do things in our far-flung spots.
I think for Lyft, we'll have a lot of challenges, in terms of, different regulatory frameworks, different systems for, how do you check someone's driving record in a different country? It's going to be different everywhere we go. So there's going to be a lot of international challenges. But I think the biggest benefit we have is that it's a service provided by, the biggest component of the service is the driver. And that's going to be local wherever we go. And that's the great part, and we've already seen that, around the U.S. You sort of automatically inherit the kind of culture and unique local flavor of whatever city you're in. And so I think that'll be the great part about Lyft. Will be a little bit different anywhere you go because it'll be provided by the local folks there.
I think mustaches translate to many different languages.
Yeah, that too.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Hello. It's my turn? Sorry. My name is John. I think one of your speakers, Mr. Khan, pointed out that his business model was he sent out the cleaner, you paid him, that was the end of his transaction. And that's great. What I wanted to know is, have you seen any novel methods of monetizing your novel business structures, particularly with regard to what technology can offer? Think of Bitcoin or crowdsourcing, things like crowdfunding. What have you tried and rejected, or what other unusual monetizing methods have you seen?
So beyond, we talked a little bit about this, beyond the transaction or the advertising, are there other kind of more experimental business models that you've looked into? Or?
I think something interesting I've seen a bit recently has been in the crowdfunding world, where like what AngelList has done with the syndicate model, where the sort of lead who puts together the round gets sort of extra points of the carry. So I think that was an interesting model where you kind of heavily incentivize a person to be the first person to commit and to round up everybody else.
Great. Last question. We have one more.
Hi, my name is Lou. For Logan, have you had to allocate precious capital to lobbyists to overturn these government restrictions? It's an unusual skill set for a startup company.
Good question.
Yeah. So we work with actually don't typically go as lobbyists. They go as consultants, and we work with consultants in most cities where we operate, and the role they play is basically kind of teaching us the lay of the land, who we need to talk with, how decisions will get made, and giving us a kind of heads up on the conversations that are going on. So yeah, it's been a very unique piece of starting a company, and we have a significant government relations team in-house as well, and spend a lot of time flying all over the country, meeting with folks. Typically, just spending our time kind of explaining how Lyft works. Our biggest challenge is letting people know, hey, look, the part that's different about Lyft is you have someone who's not a professional and they're driving their own car, But when we show them, all of the sort of extensive background checks and insurance that's provided, that generally sort of has turned the tide on these conversations.
You have enough track record now that I would imagine the resistance is much lower.
Right. I think California, San Francisco was the first city we launched in about a year and a half ago. We went through this year-long process of creating a new regulatory category for Lyft. They call it Lyft is now in the category of a TNC, a transportation networking company. So California actually adopted a new regulation to accommodate this. And now that is being adopted in a handful of other cities and is, I think, going to kind of snowball.
Interesting.
Great. Well, I would like to thank all my panelists here. You guys have been great. Thank you. Yeah. And I think we've decided that we don't need this anymore. I don't know what we can use it for, but if anyone wants it, you're welcome to grab it on the way out. Thanks very much.
I'd like to thank our speakers again. We really appreciate you bringing your candor, your insights, and also especially your humor to this discussion. And Doug, thank you so much for your masterful guidance of the conversation. Especially appreciate those follow-up questions. As a small symbol of our appreciation, please accept this Churchill Club speaker t-shirt. Please wear it in good health. Thanks again to ReachLocal and Eastwick, and you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Good night.